Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon session. At least it's afternoon um, time here on the East Coast. Katie is in a different region. But welcome to this afternoon session. This session will be discussing supplier risk management, and our speaker today will be Katie Armstrong. My name is Michael Gilman. I'm the moderator for today's session. I represent the ASQ Energy and Environmental Division. Please remember that all questions should be submitted through the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen, and we will be addressing those at the conclusion of the presentation. If there are any questions we can't get to during the presentation, we'll address those via email to those folks that that asked the question. So let me now introduce our speaker. Our speaker, Katie Armstrong, is a co-founder of a consulting firm, Armstrong Lynn Optimal Solutions, a consulting firm that will help your company unlock its full potential. Her experience is primarily in chemical, automotive, and semiconductor manufacturing industries. Her goal is to help companies grow by engaging all employees in an organization, removing any roadblocks, driving positive change, and translating the big picture goal to actionable steps and strengths. Many companies could use that assistance. At this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Katie, and I'll be monitoring the chat and the question and answer. At this point, Katie, we have 32 attendees.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that excellent intro. I couldn't have said it better myself, so thank you for that. And I think with that, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. So first of all, thank you everyone for day out. Like you said, supplier risk management. So a lot going on with that. So I'm happy to kind of jump into that now. So first, I'm going to start by kind of going over traditionally in a company, what department owns supplier risk management? And I think traditionally with most companies, it's been handled by the procurement department, and that has been sufficient for many years. And they're able to qualify new suppliers, add them to the system, and handle any sort of corrective actions or disruptions to the supply chain, anything like that. And historically, that's been sufficient. But what we're seeing now with the increase of technology, the increase of complexity in supply chains, especially with advanced manufacturing, is that it's a scope that is somewhat beyond just the traditional procurement department at this point. A lot of times it will require a lot of extra technical expertise or expertise from other departments to really have a full understanding of what goes into a supplier risk management strategy. And so I think in today's day and age, it becomes very critical to involve other departments at the company, right? It just doesn't really work for procurement to just work in a silo anymore. And so one thing we're going to kind of go over today, and this will be a through line through the presentation, is how to engage your other departments in your supplier risk management strategy. And why is it important to do that? There's a few reasons. One is that each department actually has a different priority, right? They have a different primary focus. And when you engage all these different departments, you're actually covering more ground in your risk management strategy than you would otherwise if it was just confined to one department. And so one thing that this does is a good strategy for risk is something that I call, well, I think I didn't make this up, but something called the Swiss cheese model, right? The idea is that you have a few different risks, which are like the holes in the cheese. And so the more layers you can add to your risk management strategy, the more likely you will be to cover the holes in each layer, right? So if you have 4 stacks of Swiss cheese on top of each other, there's probably not going to be any holes versus if you have just one, there's a lot of holes. So that's kind of the idea behind engaging other departments. And so with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some key risks that we've really seen in recent years. And I alluded to this when I first started talking, but uh, everybody can see, right? Everyone knows that supply chain risk has dramatically gone up in the last 5 to 10 years, particularly the last 5 years since COVID. And there's a few reasons why it's been such a dramatic shift that's led to, for example, the big meltdown in 2021, right? One is geopolitical tensions, right? It's very true right now, but honestly has been true even before COVID. There's been an ongoing deglobalization effort, which is essentially just an effort to onshore manufacturing domestically. So not just in the US, but many countries, industry leaders across the world are looking to localize their supply chain as much as possible. This is an ongoing effort that is creating more risks. Additionally, tariffs is a new one this year that is really causing problems. The unpredictability of tariffs is also a much higher risk now in this day where it could change any moment. And so that's something that is definitely driving some risk management strategies. And then finally, just the instability and unpredictability of international relationships at this point. So all of this is kind of leading to either onshoring operations or partnering with countries that are considered friendly or allied to you. The big one is climate change, right? And this shows up in kind of two different ways. One way is just in very disasters, right? We're getting more frequent natural disasters, and so this increases the risk for geographic risk, right? So if you have a supplier that's in a coastline and is at risk for hurricane season, that risk is going to be much higher now because the hurricane seasons we're getting are much worse, right? Things like that, where this is becoming a more and more important part of consumer risk. And additionally, sustainability is becoming a lot. Like Apple, other big OEMs drive supplier sustainability strategies, right? They're driving new requirements for their supply chain. Thing again that you really have to jump on early because doing something like tracking your emissions is going to be something that takes some time. So it's important to start looking into how is your supply chain? Are they aware of sustainability requirements? Do they have the infrastructure in place to monitor this going forward? And then finally, quality demands. And this shows up, I think, more so in the advanced manufacturing sectors. A lot of mine is in semiconductor, so I've definitely seen this there. But technology is really advancing at a very rapid pace now. We're seeing it kind of exponentially increase at this point. Oh, yeah. Do you have a question? Moderator, you have your hand up.
Katie, there's a comment that some of your audio is cutting in and out. Um, I'm hearing 90% of what you're saying, but if you can closer to the microphone
Okay.
or speak clear.
Let's see. How's this? Is the audio better? Is it any better?
Sounds better. Let's try that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, okay, so as I was saying, quality demands, I've worked a lot in semiconductors, so I've seen this quite a bit on my end, but the as technology really rapidly increases and is developed, this is leading to very, very strict quality requirements and increasingly strict quality requirements. So this is something again that a supplier that was meeting your quality requirements before is going to potentially struggle to meet those in the future if they're not able to keep up with the technological innovation. And we're also seeing this with things like Industry 4.0, right? Where manufacturing technology as well as AI applications are making manufacturing a lot smarter and making some companies that adopt the technology able to provide much, much higher quality results. And so, in turn, if your suppliers are not adopting that technology or not keeping up, then they will become much higher risk suppliers. So, these are the three areas that are the most kind of I would say highest impact in this day and age. And so with that, I'm going to go into some tools that you can use. And I just want to check in really quickly. How's my audio doing? Can people still hear me?
Sounds much better to me.
Okay, great. All right, that's good. So let me get into some tools for managing this. So the first one I'm gonna go over today is the heat map. This is the tool that I really love just because supplier risk management strategy can be so overwhelming when you first look at it, right? It's like, what even is that? Where do I even start with a supplier risk management strategy, right? Many companies have hundreds of materials that they get, could be even tens of hundreds of suppliers, right? So how do you make any sense of that? And one way you can do that is by using this tool, a heat map. And I love this because it's very customizable. You can choose what categories are the most important for your company and add those to your heat map. And in addition, you can weight those categories. So if you have a category that is more important to you than others, you can add additional weights to that calculation. And essentially, what this does is it ranks every supplier or every raw material that you have, and you give a ranking to each category. And so, this is also a good opportunity to capture qualitative data in a quantitative way. For example, the responsiveness column, right? You probably don't have a metric in your ERP system for supplier responsiveness, right? Like that's not necessarily a data point that you can just pull, but that is something that you can gather from talking to people that interface with suppliers, and then you can give a arbitrary ranking system, right? Like if they respond within 24 hours, they get a really good score. If it takes them 2 weeks, they get a really bad score. And so this allows you to kind of capture some of that qualitative data, that qualitative risk as well in a numerical way. And then essentially how this works is it averages out the risk of everything so that it can give you one number of truth that is the risk for that supplier or that raw material. And then you can go on to rank those and figure out, okay, what are our highest risk materials? And this, again, as I mentioned before, is actually a really good way to involve all of your different departments as well, because you're going to need to get this information from different people at your company, right? Like procurement is probably going to know about cost and on-time delivery, but then your quality department is going to know about the quality, maybe the responsiveness, business continuity, other risks like that might even fall into your finance team. And this is a really good opportunity to get everyone pitching in towards supplier risk and getting everyone on board with the strategy. And so this is a really, really great tool. And what I have here is just kind of a basic example, but like I said, very customizable, and it's sort of the first step to building a comprehensive supplier risk strategy because like everything in life, you have to prioritize and you want to make sure that the suppliers or the materials that you're working on are going to have the biggest impact to your company. So the next tool that I'm going to go over is the supplier scorecard. And this one I'm sure you guys have seen before. This is a very quality heavy audience, right? So I'm sure that you all are familiar with this. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but what I will say about this is that this is a good communication tool. So beyond the rankings and beyond anything, I think the supplier scorecard is the most useful in the sense that it lets your suppliers know what your priority as a customer is. Because customers oftentimes will have different priorities, and your supplier is not going to know what is most important to you unless you tell them. And so a supplier scorecard is a really great way to start that conversation and also to build the relationship. And now I know that nobody wants to deliver a bad supplier scorecard to your supplier, right? Because you don't want to alienate your supplier. You don't want them to stop caring about you, right? And so I think there's a way that you can deliver this and approach it from a strategic standpoint where you're saying, hey, let's work on these things together. This is what's important to us. This is what's most important to us. And here's how we're going to help you get there. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit more later, but for now, I'm going to kind of break down strategies on how to manage good suppliers versus how to manage poor suppliers. So at this point, you're assuming, you have your rankings done, you have your, say, top 10 materials or top 10 suppliers identified that you need to work on de-risking. And so the next step is to start executing your strategy. Right. So I'm going to start with the easier one first, which is managing good suppliers. Everyone loves that, right? That's the easy job. So we're going to start there. And with this one, I think the biggest sort of mistake or miss that I've seen with companies working on this is that a lot of times people tend to leave a good situation alone, right? If something's going well, a lot of times companies are more likely to just not focus their efforts on it, right? Because they're like, well, there's no problem. So why do I need to solve something if there's no problem? And so what I would say is that putting some effort into managing your good suppliers can actually really help your overall risk management strategy. And the reason that this is because even a really good supplier is not completely disaster proof, right? It's impossible to be disaster proof. You can't work with Mother Nature and say, you can't have a hurricane today, or you can't have an earthquake today, or you can't have another pandemic like COVID-19 today, right? Even a really, really well managed company is still prone to disaster. And in the case of a disaster, you want to be the customer that is number one on their list. Because if it's a really strong supplier, they probably have a very good uh, business continuity plan. And the thing about having a good business continuity plan is that even if it's the best one in the world, you're still going to have to make some hard decisions and prioritize your customers. And some of those customers are going to get their material, and some of those customers are going to get a force majeure, right? So you want to make sure that you are on the side of the customers that are going to get their material. And how do you do that? You have to build up a strong relationship with them. So a good way to do that is to actually proactively manage the relationship and show them that you want to work with them in the future. And one really great way to do this is a long-term forecast. So setting up meetings, in person with the suppliers, discussing trends you're seeing in the industry, discussing quality trends, even infrastructure trends or requirements you're seeing. This can actually be very, very useful for your suppliers because a lot of times they might not have access to these industry trends, and you as the customer oftentimes are the expert. And so this is very valuable information for them, and that can really help build a strong relationship. And also, there's a way to kind of communicate these forecasts without committing to them because I know there's a concern, right? You don't want to commit to a long-term forecast like that and then be locked in. But there's a way that you can communicate it and just say, this is meant to show you industry trends. None of this is finalized. None of this is should be seen as a purchase order. But we're meeting with you with the purpose being to strengthen our relationship, strengthen the partnership, and work together in the future. So you can frame it in a way that's useful to both of you. And then additionally, another really great way to build the relationship is to make sure that you're keeping them in your development pipeline, right? And this one probably seems obvious, but I've seen a lot of companies not really make this connection. And I think it's because R&D at a company sometimes will work in a silo separate from the corporate side or the business side. And that usually leads to them not knowing or just not having the information about who's considered a good supplier, who's considered a poor supplier. And so it's important to actually engage your R&D team and let them know, here are the suppliers that we want to use so that they go to them first during their development stages. And this is helpful for a lot of reasons, right? If it's a good supplier, R&D is probably going to have a better experience working with them. They might have an easier time developing because the raw materials might not have as many issues. And then it's also going to make scale up easier because changing suppliers in the middle of scale up, as I'm sure many of you know, can lead to a lot of issues, right? And then finally, if it's a really strict industry such as semiconductor or automotive, a lot of times you'll be locked in with your design when it's at the R&D stage. And then if you want to change suppliers in the future, you have to go through a lot of lengthy approvals and risk management and things like that. So that will help you avoid that as well. So maintaining a good relationship with your suppliers is very critical and deserves the effort, in my opinion. So now we're going to move on to the somewhat harder topic, which is how to manage your poorer suppliers. And so again, with this step, uh, you need to do a little bit more prioritization, right? So we've already done the prioritization of understanding the heat map, understanding who are your good suppliers, who are your bad suppliers. But a lot of these risk management strategies, they are going to require resources from your company, right? So you want to make sure that you're fully justifying those resources. And so these are a few questions that I put together to ask yourself just to make sure that you're really solving a high impact problem. And the first one talks about kind of, do the materials that you get represent a large portion of your revenue? So what I mean by that is, okay, maybe you have this raw material that's like a real headache, always comes late, always gets rejected, it's never good, but it goes into a product that only represents 1% of your revenue. Maybe we let that one go, right? That one might not be worth the effort. But on the other hand, if it's 1% of your revenue, but it goes to a key customer that represents 60% of your revenue, okay, maybe it is worth it then because you want to make sure that you're keeping that customer happy. So this is a great example of situation where you want to get your other departments involved, right? You want to talk to sales, you want to talk to finance, you want to gain a really good understanding of how big of an impact is this material actually making. So next one is the performance leading to significant costs of your organization, right? So this could be something like you maybe get sued by your customer because of an issue, or you lose customer business because of a quality issue, or it's something where your manufacturing line is shut down because of a supply issue, right? Those are going to be very, very high impact issues, and so you're definitely going to want to prioritize those over others. Additionally, kind of along the same lines, is it a super critical material to your business? If you all of a sudden that company gets wiped out by a tornado, is your business going to shut down? Is it going to lead to a crisis? And this one is particularly important for materials that only have a few suppliers. So if you have a rare material where there's only a few suppliers in the world, even if there are multiple options, if there's only two or three materials or options in the world, if one of them gets wiped out, you are not going to be the only customer going to the other two, right? So this is where you're going to want to have a conversation with your finance team again and say, hey, this is really, really critical to our business. It could shut down the whole thing. If one of these goes out, we're going to be in line with all of the other customers looking to get material from their backups. Let's talk about an inventory strategy or something along those lines just to really understand the risk and try to put at least some de-risking measure in there. And then finally, looking towards the future. Do you have materials in your pipeline that might not be considered high risk now, but are going to become very critical for future development? That's where, again, the earlier the better. Let's try to put some risk mitigation strategies in now so that we can future-proof our supply chain. So once you've kind of gone through these additional prioritization questions, again, just making sure that you can make the highest impact change, then you can start getting into some actual strategies for managing your higher risk suppliers. So these three I have here are by no means a comprehensive list. There are many, many different strategies that you can take for risk mitigation, but I chose these three because these have been the most impactful strategies that have worked for me in the past in my experience. But again, creativity is becoming more and more important every day with supply chain risk management. So I would encourage you to take these, tweak them to your needs, even come up with new ideas as well. But so what I'll be talking about today is kind of a few different topics. So the first one is a continuous improvement plan. And I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes at me because you've tried to implement continuous improvement plans at your suppliers and they don't care about them, right? And I get that. I understand. But so the one thing I would say about this is that a really good way to implement a continuous improvement plan in a way that your suppliers might actually do it is if you again approach it as a partnership. So you're going to say to them, here are some really important things that we need to see improved. And we're not just going to hand this to you and say, get us a continuous improvement plan by 2 weeks from now so that we can check that off on our KPIs, right? You can approach it and say, we have experts on our side, right? We have technical experts. We have maybe technical experts even in areas like finance or supply chain. Tell us what is going on. What is the barrier to success on this, right? Is it a supply issue? Is it a quality issue? And then we will help apply technical resources on our end to help you figure out this problem. And the reason that this works is because by offering your resources, you're actually helping them as well as helping yourself. Because obviously you're helping yourself because you want to have a better supply chain, but you're also helping their company as a whole, right? You're offering your resources to help their company, which means that they're going to be operating better for all their customers, not just you. So this is also a really great strategy to use if you feel like you are a small fish in their pond, right? If you feel like you're a small company that doesn't really represent a big portion of their revenue and they're just gonna ignore you. This is a good way to, I guess, sweeten the pot in a way, just to kind of offer some of your own resources as well and help them achieve that goal. So that's one strategy. Of course, that's not going to work with everyone. So if that does not work, then you're going to look for dual sourcing, right? And this I actually would say you should do in some cases, regardless of whether or not it's a good supplier. If you have a critical enough material, so for example, one of those materials that would lead to a complete shutdown in the event that you lost access to it, you should look for dual sourcing even if your supply is very strong. And this can look a couple different ways as well. It can be something as simple as just qualifying another supplier. In the instance that you do need to use them, you have them ready to go, qualified, you already have a relationship set up with them. Or it could look like actually incorporating some of their material into your manufacturing line. That's going to be very company specific. And again, this is where you're going to need to talk to your sales team. Is there an appetite from the customer to introduce dual sourcing? Is it something where it just needs to be part of your business continuity plan, or do you have to notify them at all? Right. So you're also going to want to talk to your finance team. Can we afford to have inventory of both? What's the risk level of that? So this is another one where look at your heat map, look at what your highest risk materials are, and kind of formulate a strategy from there, and make sure that you include all of your departments in that decision. The last one I'm going to kind of talk about is for kind of rare use cases, but exceedingly rare materials, which there are some, particularly in semiconductor, and I know other industries as well, right? There are some materials that really only have one or two places in the whole world where you can get them. And if that's the case, you might need to create new vendors. And that might sound insane right now, but it can be done. It requires you as the customer to have a lot of technical knowledge and IP around a certain material. So obviously you can't transfer one supplier's IP to another person, right? So this would have to be a situation where you, the customer, were the owner of that IP, or at least enough know-how to get that material transferred to someone else. And it's going to require you to go to a customer that maybe has some of the right infrastructure in place to make what you need, but doesn't make that specific product. And so this one is definitely probably the biggest investment out of these three strategies. And so it really should only be reserved for super, super critical materials that you really can't get elsewhere. So like rare earths is a great example of this, right? Um, you have to kind of create something new. And that's something that's being handled kind of on the government level more than individually. But, you might have a chemical or something like that where you can only really get it from one person, but it would be possible to get it from another supplier if you help them implement a clean room, for example. So helping to put effort into that investment, that infrastructure, the technical know-how with other suppliers can actually lead to you creating an entirely new vendor in your supply chain, which sometimes is necessary. Again, I would say it's probably a last case, but it is a strategy that is necessary sometimes. And then finally, I see that being very, very important for new industries such as quantum. So this is one that we're seeing where quantum's an industry that's still very much in its infancy, and there isn't really a known supply chain that exists right now. And so that's an area too where if you're in a very, very advanced technology sector like that, you might actually have to work with other players in the industry to build up the infrastructure for your supply chain, right? You can still reserve your IP as your own company, but it's going to help everyone to have the right infrastructure in place to start having a supply chain that makes sense for your company. So a lot of creative solutions are, like I said, are kind of needed in this day and age with the strains and stressors that we have on technology supply chains. So it's definitely, it's an interesting area to be in. And I think creativity is what's ultimately going to lead to industry leadership for companies. So I will go ahead and wrap this up so that we can get into some questions. But the last thing that I'll say is that managing supplier risk truly is dynamic, right? It requires you to look at a lot of different inputs, a lot of different data inputs, and try to find the bottom through line or the common denominator. And it really requires you to have robust relationships, both internally with the different departments at your company, as well as externally with your suppliers. And so the thing that you can really do to make sure that you're always having a good understanding and you're always at the cutting edge is maintaining your relationships and maintaining that working relationship and that flow of information. And that ultimately is going to be what will help you make the most informed supplier risk strategy that you possibly can. So I think we're right about at 30 minutes here. Yep. And so I will go ahead and wrap up and open it up for questions.
Great, Katie. Good timing. Yes, we have a few questions, so I'll summarize some of these for you. The first question has to do with the reliability issue, and I'll read to you. Can you identify supplier relationships which are promising, but reliability may be an issue? Would additional compensation overcome this?
Okay, so if I'm understanding right, you're asking about um, a company wants to build a good relationship with you, but you're worried that they won't actually follow through on what they're saying. Is that kind of, I'm getting to the gist of that?
I would say so. They may, come through the first time, but is reliability going to prove an issue down the road?
Yeah, so that's a good, I mean, that's like the age-old question, right? It is hard to tell what a company is going to do in the future. So I would say to your additional compensation point, right? I would say if you're worried about their reliability, putting a supplier contract in can be very helpful for both parties, right? And so what that does is it locks you as the customer into providing purchase orders for a certain amount of time, but then it also locks in the supplier for delivering on that, right? And so if you're worried about reliability or something like that, I would recommend, working with your legal team to create a contract of that nature. And the reason that normally works is because you're both giving something into it, right? So from the supplier side, they want consistent purchase orders. From your side, the customer, you want consistent delivery. So if either one of you backs off on that, there's going to be an issue. And so I think that's one way that you can definitely handle that.
Very good. Let me move to our next question, Katie. This question says, what would be more effective to ensure the quality of delivered goods from our sub-suppliers? Remember, we're talking to a quality audience here. Should we request them to have an international certification, i.e., an ISO 9001 certification, or should we be performing inspections at their shop?
Good question. Good question. So I would take a few strategies here. This is an interesting topic because this is another one where prioritization becomes important because there's a lot of different levels to it, I guess you can say. But I'm going to assume for this situation that quality is very, very critical for you. And if you get poor quality material, it's going to spell disaster for your manufacturing, right? So let's just say it's the highest severity case just for the purpose of this. So for this case, yes, I would say definitely ISO 9001 certification should be the most basic requirement that they should meet. But to be honest with you, it's not that hard to get an ISO 9001 certification, right? And there's certainly plenty of companies out there that are certified that continue to have quality issues. So I think it is important additionally to do on-site supplier audits, right? So have your technical experts travel to the site. Seeing a manufacturing process in person can tell you a lot about how that's managed, right? It can be very, very eye-opening. So I do really feel that in-person audits are very important and critical um, for understanding the quality. And again, it does help to build that relationship when you have those face-to-face interactions. So it's kind of a win-win. And then additionally, I would definitely recommend if it is critical to put in some quality infrastructure at your company as well. So when you're receiving the materials in, you should do some incoming quality control testing as well on your side and compare that with the certificate of analysis that they're providing, right? So doing that kind of added step of verification and then again, understanding how that affects your process, that's really going to give you the best idea and the most amount of data to work with when it comes to understanding the quality of your supply chain. So, I always say the more data you have, the better, right? Like just get as much data as possible, and that's going to help you with your problem solving.
And the response to that is totally agree with the face-to-face interactions.
Yeah.
Okay, Katie, this is a comment that came up. You had a slide that talked about the geopolitical impacts. Without getting too political, there's a lot of new things happening in the world, and the impact of tariffs on supply chain could be something we're going to be seeing in the coming year or coming years. What if your major supplier is in China or Brazil or whatever? I don't know what we're going to be able to do about that.
Yeah, so that is obviously it's a tough one, right? Like it's hard to come up with a strategy when it's as unpredictable as it is, I would say. But the way that I think about managing unpredictability is to try to assume as much control of the situation as you can, right? And so with this one, it's really going domestic because at this point, yes, you can try to look to countries that are more closely allied to you, but even that is kind of in question right now. So I would say going domestic as much as possible, but then also if that's not an option, again, forming as strong of a relationship as you can with your suppliers that are in, the tariffed areas, right? So there's always some give and take you can do, right? There's always some sort of agreement that you can come to. And it's important to make sure that both sides can kind of invest because ultimately, global trade helps make your supply chain better in the long run just because it opens up a lot more options for you and having more options ultimately leads to lower risk. So, I feel like I'm kind of saying conflicting things, but in addition to focusing on domestic supply chain, right, bringing things domestic where possible, it's important to also in parallel keep these strong relationships with countries, even if you are kind of at odds geopolitically, right? Just because you're at odds geopolitically doesn't mean that your companies have to be at odds, right? You can continue to kind of work together and try to find some form of stability in an unstable situation.
Very good, good timely response to what's happening in today's world. Another question that has come in, I'll read to you. How to reduce the risk of supplier FAI reporting with multiple errors, or even use restricted sub-tier vendors?
Okay, so let me think about that. I don't know what does FAI stand for. I don't know if the person that asks can help with that. But it sounds like they're kind of asking about sub-suppliers as well, so applying restrictions. I'm assuming this is another high-tech industry like semiconductor or automotive.
FAI is first article inspection.
Okay. So you're saying like that suppliers might be supplying incorrect reports for first article inspection, things like that.
Or does it mean we inspect carefully the first article before we proceed with full production?
Yeah. Well, that could be, can you read the question again? Let's see if I can understand it.
How to reduce the risk of supplier first article inspection reporting with multiple errors, or should we even use restricted sub-tier vendors?
Restricted sub-tier vendors. Yeah. Okay. So I'll try to understand it as best I can. So I think doing your internal testing, as I mentioned, is probably the best way to reduce the risk of getting false reporting from someone else because you can view your own testing as kind of the source of truth. So, I think it's always good to kind of confirm. And then as far as restricting sub vendors, I know that can be important, right? Depends on the industry. I've definitely seen that in semiconductor, automotive. I think pharma, I believe, does that as well. And that's something again that you kind of have to work out with your main supplier. Um, and I've seen meetings as well where you have two levels of your supply chain in the meeting, right? So you have yourself, the customer, your supplier, and then their supplier. And that can be helpful. That can also, I've seen it damage some relationships in some cases because it shows your supplier that you don't maybe trust them to manage their supplier. So I would say maybe a better way to go about it is to definitely make sure you're doing your incoming testing and then make sure that your supplier has a very robust supplier quality management system. And if they don't, that's where I would work with them on a continuous improvement plan to just help them overall improve their supplier quality management system so that in turn, anything on the second tier is going to be managed better. That's what I would say.
Katie, that's all I have at this point in the way of questions. A few people are just offering their comments to your questions, but I see most are in agreement with the responses that you're providing. So, any last thoughts before we only have 5 minutes left, or if you have any last thoughts, there's been some good discussion here.
Yeah, there's been some great discussion. I would just say, thank you to everybody for all of your great questions. Thank you for coming today. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn and reach out. I'd be happy to kind of continue the discussion as well offline. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful.
Great. Some people are responding. Great insights. Thanks for your thoughts and your presentation. So good responses. Um, Thank you to our attendees, and thank you very much, Katie, for joining us early this morning out west here. And I hope everyone enjoys the remainder of the conference. There's another session that'll be starting at 1 o'clock, and there'll be sessions throughout the day and tomorrow. So continue to join interesting sessions such as this. And thank you again, Katie, very much for a good presentation.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.